Chapter 93, Student Council President Election 6. Purposely charging headfirst into the impossible is foolish. If it's impossible to leap over the wall obstructing your view, then circling around or giving up are just a few of the countless alternatives. A wise and experienced person would seek out another method no matter what. There's always a reason when the whole world deems something impossible. Drip, drip. Raindrops slide over the cabin roof, succumbing to their weight and falling to the ground. The girl, leaning against the outer wall, stares blankly at the sky before letting out a lazy yawn. Staring at the hem of the roof, her reason for sitting outside the cabin instead of going in is quite obvious: she is waiting for someone. Although she has no particular business with them, and even their meeting wouldn't be greeted with pleasure. Lucy Mayrill waited for Ed for no particular reason. Observing the house that she's supposed to protect, Lucy feels like a gatekeeper, though in reality, she's closer to an unwelcome guest. She, however, is oblivious to that fact. Wrapping her moist, frizzy white hair up under her witch's hat, she spends her time spaced out, feeling strangely content. Waiting, an act inherently linked with boredom for the lackadaisical Lucy, paradoxically settles into a comforting calm as she leans against the cabin's outer wall, waiting for Ed. Perhaps it is because this camp space has a particularly special significance for Lucy. No matter how tumultuous and dramatic Ed's life may be, it always circles back to this cabin at the camp. The thought isn't hard to picture. He would emerge plodding through the bushes, make sure the extinguished campfire and wooden reinforcements are secure with a few kicks, then gather the soaked laundry and move any rust-prone tools under the canopy. Then, after shaking the water from his clothes, he'd approach the cabin, casually greet Lucy with a nod, and she would respond likewise. A fire would be set in the fireplace, a mana lamp lit, and then he would sit at his desk and delve into his magic engineering books. And Lucy would cozily settle onto the bed with a blanket and drift into sleep to the sound of rain against the window and the fireplace's crackle, occasionally accompanied by the flipping of Ed's book pages. Tat-a-tat-a-tat, whoosh. Suddenly, there was a rustle from beyond the thickets. There were signs of magic from more than one person. Lucy, who had been dazedly leaning against the wall, gave her nose an idle twitch. Visitors were rare at this deep forest camp, especially late at night, and under rainy conditions. If it wasn't Ed, then who could it be? Although curious, Lucy wasn't the type to ponder every detail. Regardless, unwelcome visitors to the camp were hardly pleasing. If they were welcomed by Ed, the camp's owner, she wouldn't have bothered. However, there was no guarantee that someone hadn't snuck in during his absence. In fact, when Lucy was asleep in the wooden shelter, Assistant Professor Claire had crept in unnoticed and had tried to take advantage. Typically, Lucy disliked strangers, all the more so if they intruded into her sanctuary. It was unusual for Lucy, who was typically indifferent and lazy, to stir. Shaking her loosely fitting school uniform a few times, she flung herself into the rain. Driving out unwanted intruders would do no harm. If Ed returned, he'd appreciate it and pat her head gratefully, not a bad deal. Thus, she light-footed bounded towards the direction of the sound. She had covered a good 100 meters, an easily closable distance for Lucy. There were two people beyond the bushes. A burly middle-aged knight, drenched in blood, slumped in the thicket, holding another unconscious knight. You are. Caddick and Knox, who had been subdued by Ed, had narrowly escaped from the coastal cliffs and were now fleeing back to the living quarters. Unluckily, their route had taken them close to Ed's camp. The acrid smell of blood stung Lucy's nose. "Help, please. I'm badly injured. I tripped, rolling down the slope into the woods. And my companion was mauled by wild animals. Please, at least get us back to the living quarters for medical support." Lucy silently watched Knox. Although covered in scrapes, these were more akin to burns rather than bruises or scrapes. Clear signs of magical fire or explosion. This knight was lying to her. People in extreme situations don't usually go through the trouble of lying to seek help. That's when Lucy noticed the torn bit of Knox's robe with the eagle crest of the Rothtailor family. Rothtailor. Quote, Lucy murmured, making Knox swallow hard. Regaining his composure, Knox said firmly, I am Knox, a vassal of House Rothtailor. We aren't suspicious. We came here with permission, to aid Miss Tanya Rothtailor. Quote, if you help us, House Rothtailor will compensate you appropriately. Please allow us to return to the living quarters. Quote, Lucy immediately sensed that this was more trouble than it appeared. She typically disliked getting involved, but the Rothtailor name tickled her ears. Ed once belonged to that very house. Although excommunicated and living a separate life now, Lucy, who believed herself to have a special bond with Ed, couldn't easily shake the name off. While pondering, Cadec's exposed neck caught her eye. The wound wasn't a typical animal attack. Around Cadec lingered faint water elemental magic, barely discernible, but clear to Lucy's sensitive magic perception. Neither knight appeared to have spirit affinity. The residual aura suggested a recent battle with a spirit mage. Her eyes then shifted to Knox's blood spatters. It wasn't a typical explosive magic wound. The blood had sprayed outward, as if from the front. Vassals of House Rothtailor, which excommunicated Ed. Signs of battle with a spirit mage. Blood spatters. The unnaturalness of their presence at this place and time. Finally, Lucy's gaze fell upon a wound on Cadec's leg. Alongside magical residue, it bore the mark of a puncture wound, perhaps from an arrow. That realization sent a shiver down Lucy's spine. Whoosh! With just a clenched fist, magic flowed through her body. Her advanced mana sensitivity allowed her to manipulate magic as part of her body. Arg! Like being hoisted by the scruff of the neck, Knox was lifted into the air. Lucy, making her way through the rain, looked up at Knox's Inquisition. What are you? A foreboding sense weighed heavily on the girl's heart. What were you doing? The air was suffocating. Knox felt dizzy, engulfed by fear. Even without casting a spell or using any magical tools, Lucy's pure talent wielded a hefty magic force. This raw display of power evoked an inherent terror. He could truly die. Having narrowly escaped death twice and fleeing to the northern forest, Knox now faced an unbeatable foe. Speak the truth. Quote, when magic sensitivity fails, it's hard to feel magic. If even Knox's limited perception can sense the dense magic in the air, then she's a magician of such a high caliber that a flick of her hand could cost one's life without anything to say for it. If you're honest, I'll help you. Alone, you can't do anything. Quote, from the edge of fear, a slight mercy. Knox had survived many trials. His mind was worn. That last appeal, offered right before death, was an offer he simply couldn't refuse. Eventually, Knox made a choice he should never have made. I killed someone. Quote, on the storm-battered cliffs, lead monster studies Professor Flurbin picked up a dagger at the scene. He examined the dagger's blade, its crimson engraving still vivid. It always seems to be my shift when these incidents happen. Quote, scratching his stubble, Flurbin studied the engraving pattern. It was a high-grade mark, rarely seen in the flesh. Toxic engraving, fatal upon contact. With no magic felt and only the engraving trace remaining, it was clearly used. This meant there were already casualties. Flurbin sighed deeply. Indeed, this was a major disaster. Recently, Sylvania had been rife with incidents, feeling as though, at least once per semester, catastrophes beyond handling occurred. At the cliff's edge of Akan Island, several academy staff, including Professor Flurbin, were on site, wearing their robes. They had responded to a call for help from third-year Magic Department student, Yenneca Faylover, and staff from Triss Hall who were on duty. Professor Flurbin, being the highest duty officer among today's respondents, implied the gravity of the situation was far from trivial. The subtle difference between living and surviving might seem trivial, yet its implications are profound. Just as everything has its light and shadow, so does freedom. If Adele is celebrated as a bard who praises the beauty of freedom, then this man embodies the weight and darkness of freedom like no one else. Thus, you should not approach this cabin again. Even with the protection of holy laws, one cannot avoid accidents such as falls, getting lost, or dying from hypothermia. Quote, Ed said this and respectfully bowed his head. I apologize for the harsh treatment. Unfortunately, it seems there's no one around you to share these realities, so I took it upon myself to overstep. Quote, he stood up, concluding the conversation. Please go back now. Quote, Clarice had no opportunity to reply. She couldn't even begin to address Ed as he turned to leave. They had to head back to Ophelia's hall before the blizzard intensified. Belle's guidance should make the return swift. Back at the manor, they could warm up with delicious soup in a cozy interior, sitting in a tidy room as the blizzard turned into a distant story outside the window. Holding Belle's hand and leaving the camp, Clarice managed to look back. Ed, seeing them off, returned to the cabin, shouldering his axe. The cabin would remain cold and heavy with the scent of blood, a harsh reality pressing down again. The memory of this scene wouldn't easily fade from Clarice's mind. The boy didn't seem burdened by its gravity. For him, enduring such hardships was simply part of survival. Clarice recalled reading that even beautiful swans paddle ugly under the water. The life of freedom was similarly complex. She could never have imagined such depth behind Ed's initial appearance, defending the summit's altar. Mr. Belle. Quote, yes, Lady Clarice. Quote, I'm sorry for causing you such trouble. Quote, it was merely my duty. Please don't worry about it. Quote, as they made their way through the blizzard, Clarice looked back towards the cabin several times. This was the first time since arriving in Sylvania that she felt she had met a senior worth respecting. Such an encounter would have been impossible in the Holy City. Belle, unaware of her thoughts, sweated as he saw Clarice looking back at the cabin. Could it be? No, it couldn't, could it? As the blizzard rages and winter slowly leaves, everyone experiences their own winter differently. Some are buried in magical engineering research, some converse with spirits by a window, and some complete ledger books in the warmth of their rooms. Each person finds their way to endure the season, from diligent students and failed knights to guardians of the northern plains and timid swordsmen hiding in their rooms. In the royal residence, a platinum-haired princess quietly sits by the window. Watching the snowfall, Princess Phenia of Phenia lowers her gaze and makes a small resolve. With spring and a new semester approaching, it was a time of change, including the upcoming Student Council President election. Widely regarded as a strong candidate due to her broad support across the academy, Phenia Elias Chloral decides, I choose not to run. For Ed Rothtaylor, this statement was akin to the crumbling of all premises and the onset of all calamities. Lucy remained expressionless, pressing down on her witch's hat with one hand, speaking coldly. Lucy. Images of Tanya, who had been burning with vengeance for Ed, were etched in Lucy's mind. It could have been dismissed as mere sibling rivalry, but Lucy, with her keen senses, could feel the sincerity in it to some extent. Tanya's power was insignificantly weak, and Ed himself seemed not to care much, so Lucy had left it unaddressed. It was natural for Lucy, who typically wouldn't involve herself if Ed didn't care. But this was a clear overstep. She had never thought it would come to an assassination attempt, especially in such a clumsy and obvious manner. It was beyond a rash act, it was madness. All evidence pointed directly at Tanya Rothtaylor. Logically, Tanya's guardians wouldn't commit such an act without her consent, at least in Lucy's view, not considering the influence of Krebin lurking in the background. Lucy. Ignoring Yenneke's call, magic began swirling around Lucy. Whoosh. Yenneke tried to grab Lucy quickly, but by the time she regained her senses, Lucy was already gone. What? Where the whirlwind passed, nothing remained. Neither Lucy nor Ed's belongings were there. As the storm cleared and Yenneke adjusted her robe's hood, her unexpectedly calm demeanor greatly puzzled Professor Flurbin. Miss Yenneke, what's this about? We must chase after Lucy now. Before things escalate. Boom. From above, Ophelia's hall, with its rose garden gently encased in an arch shape, stood out. Including the rooftop, the 6-story building was vast, justifying its status as one of Sylvania Academy's landmarks. In that rose garden, 2 figures fell to the ground in the wide central plaza. Clatter. Gh. Cough, cough. Quote, restrained by Lucis' magic, Caddick and Knox were downed. Caddick was still unconscious, but Knox remained aware amidst the rainy rose garden. Looking up, one could see Ophelius Hall's facade. Lucis' room was on the 3rd floor, next to Tanya's. Lucy slammed a lower-level explosion spell, blast sound, into that window. Boom. An unexpected explosion. Although the manor's defensive magic activated, it was trivial against Lucis' power. One side of the room collapsed, and amidst the rising dust and pouring rain, Tanya was nowhere to be seen. Her absence was anticipated. Lucy, with her expression still cold, looked up at Ophelius Hall. What was that noise? Get the head made. Something's happening. Is it an attack? Should we run now? Panic echoed from the manor's windows after the abrupt explosion. The building's chief caretaker, head maid Belle Meyer, seeing Lucis' figure, swallowed dryly. In the rainy rose garden, in the central plaza visible from all the manor's windows, stood a girl, deep in her witch's hat and clutching a worn men's school uniform coat, with an ethereal longbow floating beside her. Unseen beneath her hat, the girl faced the manor silently amidst the rain. Miss Lucy, what exactly is? Even as she spoke, Belle had a vague intuition. She had long cleaned up after Lucis' messes. Despite living carelessly and indifferently, Lucy never crossed the line. With her immense magical talent, she never abused her power against the maids or used it to oppress others. Thus, seeing Lucy launch an explosive spell at Ophelius Hall was shocking, but Belle Meyer, of all people, could be certain. Calm, quiet, and composed, yet, Lucy had lost her reason. The reason was unclear, but the aura flowing from beneath her witch's hat indicated that anything could happen next. Belle halted the maids, who had drawn their rapiers, with a gesture. Miss Lucy. What are you doing? Amidst the rain, Lucy, pressing down on her hat, spoke softly. Bring Tanya. Quote, magic flared again, and the 2 guardians were lifted into the air. Gah, ack, cough. With Knox flailing in the air behind her, Lucy reiterated kindly. Bring Tanya. Quote, if you want to have more videos like this, then like and subscribe to my channel and have a nice day or evening or night. I will see you soon.